Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and my topics for tonight are uh, uh, if Kamala Harris wins the election of 2024, will she go after corporate greed? I also want to talk about Biden's farewell speech at the Democratic Convention of 2024. And finally, I want to discuss the subject of the legislative priorities uh, that a Harris administration might have. So those are the three topics for tonight. I'm going to get into the first of our topics by sharing a piece from Reader-Supported News. Here we go. This is entitled, "A Very Good Sign, Kamala Harris is Going Right at Corporate Greed." This is by Nick Hanauer. It originally appeared in the New Republic. There's a picture of Happy Harris at an event in Upper Marlboro, Maryland on August 15th. Greedy CEOs have milked the average American household for $12,000 since the pandemic. As a businessman, I can explain how they're doing it. Nick Hanauer, I should add, is a very, very good businessman. Last I looked, he was a billionaire. He made his money in the furniture business. He is a billionaire who notoriously thinks that very rich people should pay far more in taxes. And he's called for higher taxes for rich people for a very long time now. Going on with the article. Americans are spending more on virtually everything, from groceries to clothing to appliances. Headlines say those price increases are supposedly a mysterious economic force called, quote, inflation, unquote. But if you compare corporate profits in 2019 to the last 4 years, you'll find corporations have gouged their way to an almost unbelievable $1.5 trillion in excess profits since 2020. That's in addition to their pre-pandemic profit rates. Okay, by the way, something like that was actually predicted back in 2020 when COVID came around. Okay, and the CARES Act occurred, and it was obvious that the CARES Act was going to allow many, many small businesses to fail and allow much more concentration with respect to larger corporate businesses. And once that happened, of course, it was obvious that the corporate business would be able to charge people excessively for their goods and services. And of course, that was likely to lead to excess profits. So the idea that excess profits have happened isn't surprising. It was predicted by those of us who talked about the possible impact of the CARES Act that was passed during the Trump administration in 2020, but that was shepherded through the House by Nancy Pelosi. That means the average American household, going on with the article, is paid an eye-popping $12,000 in higher prices solely to pump up quarterly corporate Profit margins, to put that figure into perspective, $12,000 could buy the American household more than 2 years' worth of groceries. Inflation isn't the problem, it's corporate greed, and it's a choice. To be clear, not every price increase amounts to price gouging. In the early days of the pandemic, manufacturing lines that had hummed efficiently for decades ground to a halt. Global supply chains closed down and store shelves emptied. A small increase to one input can create cascading effects, which can add up to a much higher price tag. Supply chains have long since held, and this week's inflation report shows that the inflation rate has cooled. But even though inflation has nearly returned to normal, high prices are still shocking Americans, making them feel sour about an economy and labor market that are objectively the strongest in the world right now. This presents an opportunity for Vice President Kamala Harris to build on the extraordinary economic record of the Biden administration and chart her own path forward. She has already taken a huge step in this direction by launching her economic platform with a promise to make the fight against price gouging a, quote, day one, unquote, priority. She has an opportunity to explain why prices are high and to present a plan to fix the problem by centering working Americans and not the super wealthy and powerful corporations as the real sources of our economic growth. I like a businessman who talks this way, the way Nick Hanauer talks. Over the last 2 years, CEOs learned they could get away with padding their profits by keeping prices high. We have really great evidence that this is what's been happening because CEOs admitted this is what's been happening. For example, Procter & Gamble Chief Financial Officer Andre Schulten bragged during a 2023 earnings call that even though the company's input costs to make diapers had decreased, they were still keeping consumer prices high. And they were making out like bandits because of it. Even more sharply, a Kroger supermarket chain executive crowed that, quote, a little bit of inflation is always good for our business, unquote. This corporate embrace of price gouging is a new and troubling development in American capitalism. And this is an area I know something about. I have founded, financed, and or run 43 different companies spanning a dozen different industries. I was the first non-family investor in Amazon.com. I managed my family home furnishings business, which was one of the largest in the United States, and I founded what became the largest internet advertising company in the world. So I'm deeply acquainted with all the tricks of the trade when it comes to corporate profit margins, but I've never seen executives exult in raising prices like this. In normal times, we understood customers hate higher prices, and the customers of your customers really hate higher prices. We are not in normal times. 4 decades of growing corporate concentration has distorted the market so much that CEOs are now addicted to breaking profit records. When their costs go up, prices go up. When their costs go down, prices go up. Either way, prices go up, right? To understand how the market currently works, let's follow the supply chain for milk. Pre-pandemic, for many years, the raw material price of milk and the retail price of milk moved together. When the cost to produce milk rises, retail prices rise with it. When production costs fall, retail prices fall too. Peak pandemic, that relationship continued through the height of the pandemic. The raw material cost of milk was up 43% by May 2022, and retail prices rose a similar 32% as a result. Post-pandemic, but then the relationship broke. By spring 2023, production costs fell by 22%, but retail prices barely budged. ticking just 3% lower. The extra money you're paying certainly isn't going to the people who milked the cows, sanitized the equipment, and delivered the milk. In plain English, corporations jacked up their own profit margins simply because they could. And it's not just the dairy industry. The chasm between corporate costs and profits have never been greater in my lifetime. Combined wholesale and retail margins have increased by 25% from pre-pandemic times. Food and beverage retailers' profit margins have risen by 29% from the pre-pandemic norm, and consumer prices have skyrocketed 3.44 times over producer costs over the past year. Immediately before the pandemic, corporate profits were 9.7% of the total gross domestic product. From 2020 to 2023, they spiked to an average 11.2% of annual GDP. Disparity between these two numbers amounts to a jaw-dropping $1.5 trillion more of our economy that was transferred over to corporate profits in the last 4 years. That money was picked directly from the pockets of American families who each paid $12,000 more to plump the profit margins of corporations. That's not even counting the excess annual percentage rates that have cost the average credit card user $946 over the same 4-year period. It's unsustainable. By taking a stand against those CEOs and bringing prices back down for the American people, Harris can ensure that the American people continue to make our economy the envy of the world. I don't know about that last statement, but a healthy economy is an ecosystem where companies compete for consumers and also for workers, which leads to lower prices and higher wages. Those higher wages result in stronger consumer demand, which causes businesses to create more jobs. Everyone benefits from this virtuous cycle of inclusion, innovation, and demand. And everyone loses when a greedy few CEOs who are addicted to soaring profits are milking us dry. Well, that was a rather straightforward and well-written article making clear, I believe, the mechanisms by which the corporations have milked the American public since the pandemic. So Nick Hanauer should be thanked, for this piece. There are useful statistics for all of us in it. I hope you take it very seriously and note what it says. It's an indication, though, that Harris does intend to go after corporate greed. Here's another piece that also deals with that particular subject. Let me share it. I picked it up at Portside. It was originally from somewhere else, but what Harris's bid to end the medical debt tells us about her view of corporate price gouging. For-profit hospitals jacking up prices matches a similar story of predatory corporate practices on grocery costs and housing prices. It's not market supply and demand. Corporate giants have figured out how to rip people off more effectively. This is from Chuck Idelson, and it was originally published in Common Dreams on August 19th, 2024. There's a picture of Harris, Opportunity Economy, Lowering of Costs. Speaking to a group on August 16, 2024, in Raleigh, North Carolina. The photo is from Grant Baldwin Getty Images. The caption reads, Democratic U.S. presidential candidate Vice President Kamala Harris speaks on her policy platform, including improving the cost of living for all Americans, at the Hendricks Center for Automotive Excellence in Raleigh, North Carolina. Vice President Kamala Harris' bold proposal to eliminate medical debt offers a window into the approach that informs the entire progressive economic agenda the Democratic nominee for president unveiled on August the 16th. In addition to the proposals for reinstating and expanding the child tax credit with a baby bonus for new parents, federal support for affordable housing construction, and a subsidy down payment for first-time home buyers, much of the new focus and attacks have centered on what the Washington Post labeled the first ever quote-unquote ban on price gouging for groceries and food. What makes that idea especially noteworthy is its correlation to the medical debt plan and caps on prescription drug costs and rent increases. The central cause of those inflated costs goes well beyond the usual claims of supply chain bottlenecks, government spending on social programs, and the disruption of the pandemic. In every case, there is a direct link to monopolization and big corporations exploiting those factors to jack up charges to extract higher, often record profits, well beyond their own cost to produce or provide them. Unpacking the crisis and main source of medical debt, as well as for healthcare costs overall, including for prescription drugs, provides the tell. For over 2 decades, California Nurses Association / National Nurses United researchers have studied how hospitals inflate charges over their costs. Overall, the conclusion has been that hospital profit-taking, augmented by corporate mergers, is a clear driver of medical debt. A 2020 NNU study found that some hospitals had hiked their charges by as much as 18 times over their costs, exploding profits by 411% over the prior 2 decades. NNU's forthcoming update on hospital charges will show that some hospitals by 2022/2023 were now setting charges at almost 24 times over their costs, doubling their charges over the past 20 years. Further, the biggest for-profit hospital chains set the higher prices and make the most profits from them. Among the 100 top hospitals with the highest charges, hospital giant HCA had 6 hospitals alone with a combined profit of almost $400 million for that fiscal year. Big Pharma is the gold medal winner in profiteering, which is why drug costs have become such a national scandal. The Senate Health Education, Labor and Pensions Help Committee, chaired by, guess who, Senator Bernie Sanders, issued a majority staff report in February documenting how 3 of the biggest pharmaceutical giants, Johnson & Johnson, J&J, Merck, and Bristol-Myers Squibb, also known as BMS, have prioritized profits over patient need, collectively piling up $112 billion in profits in 2022 through unethical pricing strategies, relentless price hikes, also manipulative patent tactics, and extensive lobbying efforts, unquote. That lobbying blocked years of efforts to allow Medicare to use its bulk purchasing power to negotiate lower drug prices, as most other industrial companies have achieved. It's why President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act to permit the Medicare to bargain lower prices for 10 of the highest cost drugs that treat heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and blood clots was such a dramatic success. The White House this year announced it will save millions of Medicare recipients $1.5 billion in the first year of the program. Well, you can see that's wonderful, but you can also see that's really just a trickle, in the ocean of the $1.5 trillion that was overcharged, that was talked about earlier in this article. Grocery and housing prices. There's a similar story of predatory corporate practices on grocery and housing prices. No, they're not just set by market supply and demand. Quote, is Harris right on the economics, unquote, asked political economist Robert Kuttner on Friday in response to the announcement of Harris' plan. Quote, A detailed study by Groundwork, a collaborative, found that corporate concentration and increased profits accounted for more than half of the inflation felt by consumers in 2022 and 2023, unquote. Kuttner wrote. Quote again. First, it vividly connects with the issue of inflation where ordinary people feel it. Second, the plan reframes the issue to how corporate concentration opportunistically drives price hikes. Third, the approach recasts the struggle as ordinary people versus predatory corporations. Today, everywhere consumers turn, whether they're shopping for groceries at the local Kroger or for plane tickets online, they are being gouged, wrote David Dayen and Lindsay Owens in the lead to a major American prospect series in June. Quote, landlords are quietly utilizing new software to band together and raise rents, unquote. In the quote 40 years from 1979 to 2019, non-financial corporate profits cumulatively drove about 11.4% of price growth. From April to September of last year, Dayen and Owens concluded that number was 53%. Factors include corporate concentration, high-tech pricing practices, utilizing, quote, technological innovations such as cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and surveillance targeting, unquote, of consumers to collect extensive personal information. By Jared Facundo, described a panoply of corporate grocery pricing practices, including dominance of shelf space by the biggest chains, surge pricing, repackaging goods without changing prices, and tech-driven personalizing pricing, quote, for each shopping cart, unquote, that have been, quote, the path to higher margins, unquote, increased costs, and, of course, bigger profits. Food company profit increases since inflation peaked, notes former Labor Secretary Robert Reich, include Cal-Maine, the largest U.S. producer and distributor of fresh shell eggs, whose profits soared 471%. Further monopolization has also driven food inflation, Reich says. Just four companies control 85% of beef processing, 80% of corn seed distribution, 77% of fertilizer production, and 69% of grocery sales. In an investigative report in October 2022, ProPublica's Heather Vogel described how Texas-based Real Pages software facilitated price inflation on rental units. Quote, property managers across the United States have gushed about how the company's algorithm boosts profits, unquote, she wrote. The nation's largest property management company, Greystar, used the software to price tens of thousands of apartments, unquote. In the American Prospect, Luke Goldstein also zeroed in on the effect of Real Pages practices to maximize profits in retail markets. Quote, clients accept the Real Page recommendations over 80% of the time, and the company includes provisions in its contracts to ensure rent hikes. It heavily pursues adoption to new clients of an auto accept feature that forces price increases automatically. Corporate price gouging has not gone unnoticed by the Biden administration, as Dayen and Owens note, citing the work of its agencies to aggressively target algorithmic price fixing, corporate mergers, and other practices such as junk fees and corporate care interest rates that spark inflation. Harris has been a voice on those initiatives as well, which have contributed to our economic proposals today. The proposals will face considerable assault from corporate lobbyists and the politicians they influence, of course, which will require a lot of political organizing to support. Among those praising her initiative was Senator Sanders. As staff writer Jake Johnson reported Friday for Common Dreams, Sanders called the Harris Plan, quote, an important step forward in making our country a fairer and more just society. I look forward to working with Vice President Harris when she becomes president to implement her economic agenda and more within her first 100 days in office. And again, this article was written by Chuck Idelson, who's the communications senior strategist for National Nurses United, the nation's largest union and professional organization of registered nurses, with 175,000 members. So there's another area where Kamala Harris appears to be serious about cutting back what goes on in price gouging. So it's not just in the area of grocery chains, it's in the area of housing prices, okay, as well. So those are two evidences that she's going to crack down on excess pricing by corporations. Of course, we still have to see it in order to believe it. But there's some hope that has been registered there. So let us move on. Oh, I should have shared this on Facebook. So give me a moment and I will do that. Somehow, I do not think. Oh, this is not my page. Here's my page. So let's see. Ah, there we are. So let me share this. And then go on to move to the next article. I've got around 13 comments already. So Geraldine Schumberg said, Lisa's here tonight. And Steve Wolfbrandt is here tonight. Hi, Steve. Hi, Lisa. Lisa says hello, Steve. Lisa says hello, Joe. Geraldine Schaumburg says she will do nothing. That might be true. It remains to be seen whether she's going to do anything. We have to watch carefully. We have to pressure. No honeymoon, just pressure. Lana says, hey all. Robert Copeland says, this is why we need Medicare for all. Absolutely, Robert. Absolutely. Glad to see you're still here. And Dee is here as well. And Lana says, I'm going to make some tea, but I am listening. She says, please share. Thank you, Lana. As far as housing is concerned, we need more low-income housing to be built and rent-controlled. Robert Copeland says, more than one state AG has sued RealPage on price fixing by major corporate landlords. Or should I say price gouging by RealPage? Thank you very much, Robert. You should say price gouging by RealPage. I think that'd be fine. So I'm now going to share the screen for the next piece, which is on Biden's. No. I got to bring this over here, and I got to bring that over here. It's on Biden's farewell. I have two pieces on Biden's farewell speech that provide different views about his farewell speech. The first piece, which I am sharing right now, comes from the American Prospect. It was written by Harold Meyerson, I believe. Yes, Harold Meyerson. He's been a labor columnist for ages and ages and ages. He used to be a columnist for the Washington Post. I don't know if he writes there anymore, but he's been writing for the American Prospect for a very long time also. Anyway, the title of this is Biden's Farewell. The president got a late start and a rousing send-off by Harold Meyerson, August 20th, 2024. Okay. So, President Joe Biden delivers the keynote address at Democratic National Convention, August 19th, 2024 in Chicago. For a guy who'd recently admitted he'd asked his staff not to schedule him any events after 8 p.m., Joe Biden burned the midnight oil pretty well on Monday night. The mangled and inaudible lines no longer mattered the way they did when he was still the party's standard bearer. Fluffs notwithstanding, he delivered a speech that was both effective and affecting. The pathos, if pathos there was the pathos of age, not of ineffectualness. Biden's attacks on Trump were forceful, so were his endorsements, of Kamala Harris. Biden deserved a victory round, chiefly for what he'd done on the economy. I guess I have to disagree with that because the genocide going on in Gaza is so egregious. Our complicity in that is so egregious. It's like there are certain things you can't do. They negate the rest of what you've done, no matter how good, it is. I mean, you can say he deserves some credit for this, but sometimes what you're doing, does something that's so horrible that on balance, you have to say that his presidency was just out of bounds because of Ukraine, because of Gaza. He threw it all away. Without those very, very big mistakes, in my view, it would be justified to call him a very good president. I still wouldn't say, a great president, because he screwed up on quite a few things. But in his 3.5 years, things have certainly improved because of what he's done in terms of the economy here. But on the international stage, as I've said many times on this program, his foreign policy has subjected us to substantial nuclear risk for the first time since the middle 1980s, the first time in 40 years. Really, that's terrible. Anyway, Biden deserved the victory round chiefly for what he'd done on the economy. At one wonderful moment, he even summoned the temerity and historical accuracy to note that his economics were not only not those of the Republicans, but not those of his Democratic predecessors either. Economies prosper, he said, from the middle out and the bottom up. The top-down model had never worked. Republicans said it worked, and in a somewhat muttered aside, he even added that, quote, a lot of Democrats thought it worked. So they did. And it's not those Democrats' party anymore. That was evident at the moment that this long evening session perked up, first with the brief appearance of Kamala Harris on the stage, and then with the fighting speeches of UAW President Sean Fain, and in her first address to a national convention, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The two Social Democrats took the stage to rapturous receptions, which in AOC's case, an observer might not have predicted when Nancy Pelosi reacted in a distinctly non-friendly manner when, as an incoming first-termer, she joined a sit-in in the Speaker's office. I remember that. Does that mean that some sectarian leftists allege that AOC is sold out to the mainstream? Absolutely not, says Meyerson. A lot of people would disagree with that. AOC's reception, like Fain's, was evidence not that they'd moved to the center, but rather that on economics, the party had moved toward them. I can accept some of the truth of that the party has moved toward them. Maybe not the top leaders in the party. Maybe not Nancy Pelosi herself, uh, uh, maybe not Chuck Schumer, uh, and you could argue whether Biden himself had really moved towards AOC. But uh, anyway, it was one more reminder that Biden had made all those progressive appointments to the Labor Department and the regulatory agencies because he understood very well that his party had moved, that the 2008 crash and the ensuing Great Recession had soured the young on unbridled capitalism as the Great Depression had soured their grandparents. On Monday night, AOC established herself as that generation's champion. That is the millennial who understood what they'd gone through because she'd gone through it herself, emerging by the end of her talk as one of the party's foremost stars. Harold Morrison might be quite right there. I've been going to Democratic conventions for more than 50 years now, he says, and I've never heard anything near the number of references, all auditory, to unions as I heard on Monday night. A half dozen union leaders spoke from the stage. That was just one of the evening's themes, of course. So were the fights uh, um, 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 to restore abortion rights, civil rights, and to preserve the all too shaky foundations of American democracy. But the party has been liberal on social issues for decades. Reclaiming a neo-New Deal perspective on the economy has only been going on since Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren burst onto the national scene. Well, Bernie burst onto the national scene, I think, in the 1980s, didn't he? Originally, he's been around for a long time. Those perspectives had not been in evidence during the administrations of Carter, Clinton, and Obama. Absolutely true, that last. The chairs for Fain and AOC and then for Biden were of a piece. Cheers for those who returned the cause of economic justice to the center of Democratic ideology. That's the ideology that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz inherit, and from which they haven't shown any significant inclination to stray. Indeed, I think they understand they need to take it further. Democrats have never loved Biden more than they did on Monday night, but they loved him precisely because he stepped down. By having done it so late in the game, he effectively made Kamala the immediate de facto nominee, and she's done so well as a candidate that the glow from her candidacy now shines on Biden too. Biden's ending his candidacy produced a tsunami of relief. Kamala's subsequent candidacy has produced waves of joy. The affection scene for Biden Monday night, he took 5 minutes to get going through the applause, was appreciation, not for his tenure in office, not just for his shifting the party's mission to one that took on the current incarnation of American capitalism, but also for his reluctant realization that he had to pass the torch. Had Kamala somehow fumbled it during the past month, there would have been anger at the tardiness of his decision not to run. That she hasn't fumbled it, that she's exceeded all expectations, meant that Biden could come before delegates whose affection and respect for him weren't clouded by his having hung on for so long. As retirement parties go, it was loving and a blast. That's what Hal Myerson had to say, about that. Of course, everybody has to notice that Biden's foreign policy was missing from that particular very laudatory uh, piece of writing. Now we go on. Well, there's one comment by Lana. I am a fan of labor, but they aren't always friends. In Minnesota, they're okay with plundering the earth in exchange for possibly poisoning my water. A reference is nickel and copper mining. Lana says also the guy thrown out of the convention 2 days ago for holding a banner to protest Israel-Palestine was nearly pulled out of his seat by at least one union member. He named the union, but I don't recall which one. Robert Copeland says RealPage is a company that has their algorithms set the rent, that corporate landlords can charge their rent as high as they can to make those profits when it comes to rent. Thank you, Robert, for that comment. So, next, here is a contrary opinion on Biden's farewell speech, and it uh, is in Common Dreams, and it was written by Norman Solomon. It's called Biden's Cruel and Orwellian Remarks on Gaza uh, at the DNC. A speech that denied the suffering of Palestinians was a journey into an alternative a universe of political guile from a president who just 6 days earlier had approved sending $20 billion worth of more weapons to Israel. It's by Norman Solomon, August 20th, 2024, from Common Dreams. I think the headline is a brutal headline, but to the point. An observation from George Orwell, quote, those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future, unquote, is acutely relevant to how President Biden talked about Gaza during his speech at the Democratic Convention Monday night. His words fit into a messaging template now in its 11th month, depicting the U.S. government as tirelessly seeking peace while supplying the weapons and bombs that have enabled Israel's continual slaughter of civilians. Now, folks, I think that's fair. That is what's been happening. Quote, we'll keep working to bring hostages home and end the war in Gaza and bring peace and security to the Middle East, unquote. Biden told the cheering delegates, quote, as you know, I wrote a peace treaty for Gaza. A few days ago, I put forward a proposal that brought us closer to doing that than we've done since October 7th. Well, it would have been closer if after presenting the peace treaty, he had withdrawn the arms shipments. It was a journey into an alternative universe of political guile from a president who just 6 days earlier had approved sending $20 billion worth of more weapons to Israel. Yet the Biden delegates in the convention hall responded with a crescendo of roaring admiration. Yes, they did. The applause swelled as Biden continued, quote, we're working around the clock, my Secretary of State, to prevent a wider war and reunite hostages with their families and surge humanitarian health and food assistance into Gaza now to end the civilian suffering of the Palestinian people and finally deliver a ceasefire and end this war, unquote. In Chicago's United Center, the president basked in adulation while claiming to be a peacemaker despite a record of literally making possible the methodical massacres of tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians. Orwell would have understood. Specifically, a political reflex has been in motion from top U.S. leaders claiming to be peace seekers uh, while aiding and abetting the slaughter. Normalizing deception about the past sets a pattern for perpetrating such deception in the future. And folks, that has been a pattern. It's been a pattern of the Democrats and of the Republicans for as long as I am able to remember. There's been deception concerning the past when our presidents are discussing politics. And that sets a pattern for perpetrating deception in the future, not just by yourself, but by your opponents also. What set the stage for the deceptions by Donald Trump when he ran? What set the stage for that was the narrative deceptions by the Democratic Party about the economy since at least the early 1990s. I'm editorializing a bit there. And so, working inside the paradigm that Orwell described, Biden exerts control over the present, strives to control the narratives about the past, and seeks to make it all seem normal, prefiguring the future. The eagerness of delegates to cheer for Biden's mendaciously absurd narrative about his administration's policies toward Gaza was, in a broader context, the convention's love fest for the lame duck president. Hours before the convention opened, Peter Beinart released, a writer who usually, is on the left, especially when it comes to Palestine, released a short the video essay anticipating the fervent adulation. Quote, I just don't think when you're analyzing a presidency or a person, you sequester what's happened in Gaza, unquote, he said. Quote, I mean, if you're a liberal minded person, you believe that genocide is just about the worst thing a country can do. And it's just about the worst thing that your country can do if your country is arming a genocide, unquote. Beinart continued, quote, and it's really not that controversial anymore that this qualifies as a genocide. I read the academic writing on this. I don't see any genuine scholars of human rights international law who are saying it's not indeed there. If you're going to say something about Joe Biden the president, Joe Biden the man, you have to factor in what Joe Biden the president, Joe Biden the man has done vis-a-vis Gaza. It's central to his legacy. It's central to his character. And if you don't, then you're saying that Palestinian lives just don't matter. At least they don't matter this particular day. And I think that's but humane. Boy, that was an understatement. Inhumane. I don't think we can ever say that some group of people's lives simply don't matter because it's inconvenient for us to talk about them at a particular moment, unquote. Underscoring the grotesque moral obtuseness from the convention stage was the joyful display of generations as the president praised and embraced his offspring. Joe Biden walked off stage holding the hand of his cute little grandson. Gee, I thought that was his granddaughter, but his grandson. A precious child, no more precious than any one of the many thousands of children the president has helped Israel to kill. That post did not put too fine a point on this. It was right out there, and it was true. And the ethical judgments were legitimate, absolutely legitimate. So let me look at your comments on that. Lana says, also, some unions are anti-single payer healthcare. They are. Lana says, aha, sounds like a bad site, Robert. Robert says, Lana, then people should educate those unions why we need Medicare for all. God, we've been trying for years and years and years, Robert. Okay. Deception and just plain leaving information out. The sin of omission. The Dulles brothers were evil SOBs. I had to find that information on my own. Never heard it on the news, or in school. And Lana says, Peter Beinart getting better with time. I agree with you. He's been getting much better with time. And Lana says also Joy-Ann Reid. They both have been pretty centrist Democrat stooges in the past. But I think Peter Beinart has been getting better for a much longer time than Joy-Ann Reid. She has been very recent, only since Gaza has stuck in her craw. That has really stuck in her craw. And she has to be admired now because she's obviously risking her job by doing the commentary that she's been doing. So I'm going to go on to the last of our pieces for tonight. That piece is on the subject of the legislative priority question. We now, given the great enthusiasm of the Democrats and all the volunteers they've been getting and the monetary support they've been getting, and what the polls are showing, we obviously, what is staring us in the face is not a Trump presidency, but a Harris presidency. It's far from a sure thing yet. Certainly, Trump and his supporters are going to fight very, very hard, using every dirty trick that they can muster. And the contest is probably going to be a close one. I say probably. That seems to be the likelihood, but I wouldn't let out of possibility that this will turn into a landslide for Harris. But that raises the legislative priority question. And that is the title of this piece by David Dayen on August 20th, 2024. Democrats are still enthralled to doing everything all at once. And that has been, I think, a Democratic problem. Not the only Democratic problem. Here's a picture of Harris and Walz talking during the Democratic National Convention on Monday night. One thing that was difficult for Biden in 2021, 2022, which ended up sapping quite a lot of his goodwill, as the negotiations over Build Back Better dragged out, was that he refused to prioritize any piece of the agenda, instead going for it all. When the mansion, the cinematic wall, ended up nullifying a lot of the taxes needed to cover the expense of new programs under the PAYGO laws, instead of setting priorities, Democrats pinched the programs and time-limited them, making them abjectly worse in the name of just getting started. Now, I completely agree with that. Nor do I think that Biden was forced, to go that way. He could have forgotten about the taxes. He could have minted $100 trillion platinum coin. He could have had it taken up to the Federal Reserve. The money would have eventually ended up in the Treasury spending account. And then he could have pointed to that money, pointed to the fact that the debt was completely covered by that money, and there was plenty of money left over for all kinds of deficit spending. And then he could have dared Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to have opposed what he wanted to do with the Inflation Reduction Act and the other programs of his that they were opposing. They were opposing. We know why they were actually opposing those programs. They didn't like them because they went against the interest of their donors. But they opposed those on grounds of fiscal irresponsibility. And with the $100 trillion sitting in the Treasury spending account, they wouldn't have had that excuse. And Biden could have pressured them and other Democrats with that and maybe gotten that through. Going on. In the end, priorities did get set for Biden, but by Congress and by Joe Manchin in particular. An underrated reason for Biden's loss of popularity in 2022 in particular was the endless discussions on passing bills, where Manchin was the most visible figure in the Democratic Party. I wrote about this quite a lot at the time, says Dave Dayen. I have to recall here also what happened to Obama. What happened to Obama in 2009 was he quickly passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the ARRA, also known as the stimulus bill, or the Recovery Act. But that was too small. It was too small because instead of spending the $2 trillion he needed to spend that was recommended by Christina Roma, He spent only about 800 billion on that Recovery Act. He realized later it was too little, but it was too late. He couldn't go back to the Congress and get any more. This was not only Obama's fault, though he has the ultimate in responsibility for this. It was also Larry Summers' fault because he did not allow the proposal of Christina Roma to spend $2 trillion okay, on the ARRA ever to get to Obama's desk. So he never saw it. Now, this, of course, at first everything seemed all right, but he didn't get the credit for lifting us out of the recession within 3 months, which that other bill would have done. Therefore, when he started working on healthcare reform, he also, of course, would not go for Medicare for all. He had a simple Medicare for all. He started working on public option bills, and finally they got rid of the public option, but they endlessly talked for months and months and months about the healthcare reform. In February of 2009, he could have passed John Conyers' 35-page Medicare for All bill that month when he had the world at his feet and the Republicans by the throat. And he was not interested in doing that. He was interested in saving the pharmaceutical industrial complex and the medical industrial complex from the pitchforks. That led to all the wasted time, all the tiresome discussions on healthcare reform that took place between March 2009 and March of 2010, when they finally passed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, the PPACA, also known as the ACA. That was a giveaway to the pharmaceutical companies, okay, and also to the insurance companies. And while the bill has become more popular over a period of time, by and large, it has been a failure. And it was a terrible political failure in 2010, and is the reason why the Democrats were swept out of office by the Republicans in 2010. And that was terrible because it led to a disaster in relation to politics for the rest of the decade. Instead of Obama having the world at his feet, okay, as a hero, he was constantly and tiresomely fighting with the Republicans for the rest of his 2 terms. He got hardly anything else done when it came to legislation during that time because they were trying not to give him a crumb. It was awful. And in my view, it made him largely a failure. He did get something done in foreign policy with the JCPOA treaty with Iran, but I don't think he did anything good outside of that for the rest of his presidency. He was a loser in my view. On a convention floor last night, I was able to talk to a few members of Congress. I'm going back to the article. And I put to them the idea of what happens if they achieve their goal of a trifecta under President Kamala Harris in 2025. In particular, I asked what they would prioritize. Yeah, because I think there's a chance they will gain a trifecta, but I think the odds are a little low on that because the Senate map is very hard. In particular, I asked what they would prioritize. Robert Garcia, Democrat of California, started with the democracy-related bills, the For the People Act, and the John Lewis Freedom to Vote Act. Those are just core democratic values that we will carry forward. But then he added that Kamala Harris will add an agenda onto that, including all the care economy measures and codifying Roe v. Wade. When I asked Representative Greg Casar, a Democrat of Texas, who was on the path to potentially becoming a progressive caucus chair, he added even more to that agenda. I think that if we have the ability to really pass uh, uh, to pass any legislation, I think day one, restore abortion rights across the country. There's a clear mandate for that. Day two, address voting rights and civil rights across the country. And I think day three, you do the things that matter to working people, which are things like the right to unionize in this country with the PRO Act, taxing the wealthy to pay for things that people really deserve, like health care, okay, and child care. You won't have to increase taxes to pay for health care. That is a bad understanding. If you pass a Medicare for All bill, that should cut healthcare expenditures pretty quickly and eventually to 50% of what we spend now. And we spend in 2022, we spent $4.3 trillion. I think we spent more in 2023, but okay, I don't think the results have come out yet. We're spending 18% of GDP on this. The average country in the OECD is spending 9%. They all have various kinds of universal healthcare systems, higher life expectancies than we do, better healthcare than we do, okay, in general. And our system, of course, is a scandal among all of the OECD nations. Okay, I like this particular agenda, but I have to add to it two very important things, state and opinion. First, this is not actually legislation or passing a bill, but what they have to do on day one is get rid of the filibuster in the Senate. Because if they don't get rid of the filibuster to address voting rights and civil rights and abortion rights across the country, they're going to need 60 votes. And they're not getting 60 votes. Those bills are not money bills. So they will need the 60 votes unless they get rid of the filibuster. That's got to be done on day one. The other thing that has to be passed, okay, on day one, because it's very, very urgent, is a law reversing the presidential immunity decision of the Supreme Court and putting the exceptions clause into it so the Supreme Court is not able to review that particular bill. We can't have a president who's immune from criminal prosecution. Even if that president doesn't seem to want to do anything that breaks our laws, we must be able to say that as a nation that no one is above the law. Today, we can't say that either before January 20th of next year or after January 20th. If it goes on that long, we have to be able to say no person is above the law in the United States, including the President of the United States. That is just essential for us as a nation, not just to be perceived that way, but to have that simply as a reality. That has to be a priority. The next priority, I would say, is passing a Supreme Court expansion law. That should happen, okay, on day one also. Yes, restore abortion rights is a clear mandate for that. But before you address the Voting Rights and Civil Rights Acts, vote to expand the Supreme Court by 6 persons. So the 6 appointments, basically Federalist Society appointments at the Supreme Court, are neutralized very quickly in 2025. That's essential. You got to get rid of those Supreme Court people. On day 3, you do the things that matter to working people. I agree with that. So I'm not going to repeat it. Now, Dave Dayen said there's a logic to some of this. The abortion and voting rights measures are things that you would need to be exempted from the filibuster to pass. Don't exempt them from the filibuster. Get rid of the filibuster so you never have to worry about it again. That should be done when Chuck Schumer organizes his Senate. If they get a majority, when he organizes the Senate on January 3rd, the filibuster needs to go, period. That rule needs to be taken out of the set of rules. And they can't filibuster that. So they can do that on the first day when they're organizing the Senate by a majority vote. That is what they should do. Anyway, Dave says, but there's pretty broad agreement on the particulars from the party. Codifying Roe is fairly straightforward. Democrats in the House have already passed the voting rights bills. Then on the rest, there's a big tax fight coming in 2025, and there should be some residual money available there for at least some facets, of the care economy agenda. And even if it's not enough money for the care economy agenda, the care economy bill should be passed anyway. They can be funded with that $100 trillion coin that either Biden or Harris should mint. Should get minted. Certainly, if Biden doesn't do it, by the time Harris gets in, that's the first thing she could do, and she doesn't need the legislative branch to do it because she's already been granted the authority by the legislative branch to do that. Dave goes on, but I don't see a lot of people thinking about what's going to take precedence or looking ahead to when the money is finite and getting programs permanently in place, not temporarily, like the child tax credit increase becomes paramount. Again, that worry would be taken away by minting that platinum coin, that $100 trillion coin, and getting it in the Treasury spending account. It would take more than day 1. That would happen on day 2 or day 3 because you got to get the coin up to New York and deposit it in the New York Fed, in New York, in order to get it into the Mint's Public Enterprise Funds account. From there, that account has to be swept for the seniors' profits, which is almost the whole $100 trillion. Nobody wants to put one program ahead of another, especially during campaign season. But the Democrats need a philosophy that it's better to actually get something solid and lasting done rather than mashing everything to a pace just to say that they have a comprehensive agenda. I do think that Harris, who has more buy-in and goodwill than Biden had coming in, could be able to actually set priorities and pick and choose. To some extent, she's doing that on the campaign trail already. There's also room to get a lot done on many priorities through executive action. Yes, I'll be doing a day 1 agenda revisited soon because they did a day 1 agenda for Biden before he took over. But there's only so much to stuff in legislatively at once, at least given the limitations of our Congress. But those limitations can be removed if they get rid of the filibuster and if Harris mints the coin so that people can't use the excuse that money is unlimited. That money is limited and that they're constrained by scarcity. They're not constrained by scarcity. Minting that coin will illustrate that for the public. They'll still have to prioritize because you want to prioritize the things that are necessary to clear the way to get all the other things done. But you have to think about that in a very cold and ruthless way. Think about what you have to do to get the most important things actually done. Certainly, the important things are presidential immunity has to go. The filibuster has to go. Roe v. Wade has to be codified, and that decision by the Supreme Court overturned. And the Supreme Court has to be expanded so that it's not a sword of Damocles hanging over all of the good legislation that might be passed if the Democrats do get a trifecta. So, on that note, I'll take the rest of your comments. Starting with Lana. Rose Roach is a union leader and is still attempting to educate uh, uh, the unions on single payer. It's a project. Why doesn't she get Bernie to help her? I'm sure Bernie would be happy to go talk to all the unions and explain why Medicare for All is essential. And Lana says, I like Dave Dayen, so do I. He's one of the very best of the journalists out there. He's a terrific writer, he's a prolific writer, and he's a great analyst. I don't understand why he doesn't emphasize the MMT aspects more. He knows some MMT, I know that. Chris Hadges called Kamala an empty suit. Maybe she is, but that remains to be seen. Joe, what can we do to hammer home that single-payer healthcare is fiscally responsible, that not putting it in place is fiscally irresponsible? Well, what you have to do is to talk about a public purpose and the necessity to pass bills that accomplish the public purpose. One of the most important aspects of the public purpose is healthcare as a human right for people in this country. And what actually delivers healthcare as a human right at zero cost, at the point of service? It is Medicare for all. It is single payer healthcare. So spending on that is fiscally responsible because it's spending for the public purpose, and it's also fiscally responsible because it's going to cut expenditures on healthcare by 50%. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. But in the first year, it's going to cut expenditures for healthcare at least by a quarter, maybe by even 40%. Lana says, I want to share with you the calculator for Medicare for All savings that Dave G sent to me. You have shared it. In fact, I have it up on my screen right now. And Robert Copeland says, I call it the Unaffordable Care Act. Was the Unaffordable Care Act. Evelina says, I doubt Kamala will be rocking the boat. She's there for a smooth ride, has been as VP these years. Well, as VP, she had to be along for the ride. She didn't have any choice. I mean, was she going to ruin her chances, to be nominated for the presidency? Okay, what I want to say about this is, when people take over, there's also a degree to which what they'll do, is unexpected. We have to see what she'll do. It won't take long. We'll know after 2 or 3 months what she's going to try to do, whether she will be rocking the boat. There are some indications of what she said and done so far that she may be rocking the boat. Actually, I was talking to Lisa this morning, and I was mentioning people in history who surprised us because they weren't supposed to rock the boat, and other people who surprised us because they were supposed to be people who would rock the boat. One example of someone who was not supposed to rock the boat at all was Pope John the 23rd. He had been, as a cardinal and going up through the church hierarchy, he had been very quiet. he had been part of the census. He had been part of the consensus of the church. No one expected him to be, a revolutionary pope. They expected him to be sort of a continuity pope. They knew he would die in a few years, as he did. But the 3 years he was pope was the most revolutionary 3 years in our lifetimes. Nobody expected that from him. Also, John F. Kennedy, when he took over as president, no one thought he was going to rock the boat on civil rights. No one thought that he was going to rock the boat when it came to health care, which he tried to do. No one thought he was going to be as rigorously Keynesian as he turned out to be. He was a surprise. Lyndon Johnson even was a surprise. No one expected him to be the one to pass the Civil Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act. Who would have thought that would have come from Lyndon Johnson? What I'm saying, of course, is sometimes surprises happen. And here's a negative example. A negative example is Barack Obama himself. There were great expectations of him when he took over as president. There were people on the inside who knew that the healthcare industry had already bought him off. But we did not learn that until much later. It was apparent by March that he'd been bought off already. But when he took over in January and February, there were very high hopes, and based on his campaign statements, they were justified. And then he screwed up in various ways that I've already described. Obama, hope and change, BS hot air. He's still doing the BS hope. Still, he did it at the convention. And he never wanted to change anything. But we expected him to be that person. And he unexpectedly disappointed us in all sorts of ways. Lana says, will you share the price comparisons in the calculator on your screen? Not really tonight. It's not on my agenda for tonight, Lana. In fact, I want to end this soon because, I want to go over to the convention and I want to see what Kamala has to say for tonight. Lana says, picking Tim Walz was a bit of a surprise. Yeah, it was a surprise. It was definitely a surprise. Definitely a surprise. Unexpected. And she says, Beckett, a surprise. I'm sorry, Beckett. I'm not sure what you mean by Beckett. She'll make it look like it's rocky. She'll pout and whine. Yeah, she might do that. And look tired. Yeah, she might do that. I agree, Evelina. She might. All I'm saying is that our expectations, both positive and negative, are often voided by reality. I'm saying the possibility of change, is there. Let's see if she has the inner strength, to make it. Let's see if she has the strength, to go for the gold. What that means, in my terms, is not, to go for the money. It's to go for a great presidency that rivals the presidency of Franklin Roosevelt. We've been waiting for it now for a very, very long time. It's coming up on 90 years. It's time for that kind of presidency once again. It's 90 years, 80 years. It's time for that kind of presidency once again. Oh, yeah, Henry II of Britain, Henry II, gave the Archbishop of Canterbury to Becket. Becket then truly became religious and turned on him. Yeah, that's another great example, Lana. Thank you for recalling that to me. That's a wonderful example. It's a wonderful example. Harris is not expected to be a great president. She's expected by progressives to be a mediocre president. Maybe she'll surprise us. I hope so. The capacity for surprise is there. Lana says, I went way back in history. Yes, you did. You did go way back in history. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody, for coming tonight. I'm going to end it here. I'll be back on Saturday, most probably with another domestic program, unless we have some foreign policy developments. Okay, they're very important. But I'll be covering some really great pieces by Tom Hartman and also some other pieces as well. I'm stacked up with things to cover. I hope she and Walsh truly surprise us in a good way. And Evelyn says, I'd rather be surprised, okay, by Jill. And Lana says, good night. On Jill, I do want to make one comment on Jill and on the Green Party, okay, in general. Jill and the other third party candidates started their campaigns too late. They have to start campaigning 2 years before the election because they have to get known by everybody 2 years earlier. If they don't get known, they can't get enough money in small donations to get their message out. Jill Stein cannot get her message out in this campaign. Now, shifting over to Bobby Kennedy, he probably had enough banking in money to get his message out. Unfortunately, too much of his message is just a terrible message. And now it looks like he's up a creek without a paddle. And there's talk of his doing something totally unexpected, by the way, and totally reprehensible, and that is join forces, okay, with Donald Trump. But we'll see about that in the coming days. Tomorrow he's supposed to be giving a major address, and we'll see what he has to say. But it's likely to be a big dog. Lana says, poor Jill, racked with lawsuits to fight the Dems in many states to get on the ballot. So upsetting. So upsetting, but there's nothing we can do about it and nothing she can do about it. She started this campaign very, very late. She was nominated by the Green Party very, very late. They should have had a very early convention. Lana says he's supposed to endorse Trump and drop out. Yeah, that's what I've heard too. That is absolutely unacceptable. That is absolutely disgusting and reprehensible and unforgivable. He will end his political career as quickly as it began, I'm afraid. And what will happen to Shanahan, I don't know. Maybe she'll simply join the other plutocrats, okay, from Silicon Valley. Terrible, terrible stuff. Okay, I'm going to end now. I'll see you on Saturday.